Introduction: The Unseen Bridge. Today, we're embarking on a fascinating journey through a period of history that's often overlooked, yet incredibly vital for understanding the entire biblical narrative: the 400 years of silence between the Old and New Testaments. Many people assume these were uneventful, empty years, a mere pause in God's story. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, these 4 centuries were brimming with drama, conflict, and profound change. We're talking about empires rising and falling, intense cultural clashes, fierce revolts, and beneath it all, a meticulous spiritual groundwork being laid for the arrival of the Messiah. This period isn't just a gap. It's the crucial bridge that connects everything. It holds the key to understanding why the world looked the way it did when Jesus stepped onto the scene. And here's a heads up. This isn't your typical Bible study. You won't hear a constant stream of Bible verses, and there's a good reason for that. The powerful events we're about to explore aren't primarily recorded in the scriptures themselves. Instead, they're found in a wealth of historical documents and ancient writings that meticulously fill the gap between the last words of the Old Testament and the first scenes of the New. So, I invite you to approach this with a mindset of learning and discovery. Think of this as history, context, and divine preparation, all woven together into one incredible timeline. If you're someone who likes to take notes, now's a fantastic time to grab a notebook or open your notes app and jot down what truly stands out to you. And hey, before we dive in, I have a small request. If you haven't already, please take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button. It's a simple yet powerful way to support the channel and helps us create more content like this. Go ahead and tap the like button too. It genuinely helps get this video out to more people. And if this video speaks to you or illuminates something new, please share it with someone else who's hungry to understand the Bible in a deeper way. Done that? Awesome. I truly appreciate you being here. All right, let's begin. The silence begins. Malachi and the end of prophecy. The final words of the Old Testament came through the prophet Malachi. By this time, the Jewish people had returned from their long exile in Babylon and had successfully rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. On the surface, it seemed like a true restoration had taken place. The magnificent temple stood once again, and worship had officially resumed. But inwardly, things were far from restored. The hearts of the people were still distant from God. The priests, who were meant to be spiritual guides, treated their sacred responsibilities with shocking indifference, offering defiled sacrifices and dishonoring the very sanctity of the temple space. The people themselves had grown disillusioned, questioning God's justice and doubting his promises. Yet, even in the midst of this spiritual malaise, God continued to speak through Malachi. He gently reminded them of his faithful love, urgently called them to return to him, and then gave one final, powerful promise. A messenger would come to prepare the way for the Lord. Malachi's message ended with a prophecy that would echo for centuries. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. These would be the last recorded words from God through a prophet for a very long time. For centuries of profound silence followed. And then, the direct voice of God ceased. This period is often starkly referred to as the 400 years of silence. It wasn't that nothing at all happened, far from it, as we'll soon see. But for the first time in their history, no new scripture was written, and no recognized prophet rose to speak with divine authority. For a people who had once heard directly from Moses on Mount Sinai, from Elijah in the wilderness, from Isaiah in the royal courts, and from Jeremiah in the bustling streets of Jerusalem, this silence felt profoundly strange and incredibly difficult. The prophetic voices that had once guided, corrected, and comforted them were now absent. The heavens seemed quiet, almost empty. Still, silence does not mean that God had withdrawn or abandoned his people. In this long, quiet span of history, he was still working. He was meticulously shaping events, nations, and human hearts behind the scenes. The entire world was being prepared, piece by piece, for the long-awaited arrival of the Messiah, even though no one could clearly perceive it at the time. During these years, the very identity of the Jewish people was rigorously tested and refined. They faced the immense influence of foreign powers and significant cultural change, which would challenge their faith in unprecedented ways. The Persian era, return and rebuilding, c. 539 to 331 BC. The first of these powerful empires to dominate the scene after Malachi was Persia. Following their return from Babylonian exile, the Jewish people lived under Persian rule. Judah had been reduced to a small province within a truly vast empire. They were no longer captives in a foreign land, but they weren't truly free either. The Persian rulers, however, were generally tolerant. They allowed the Jewish people to practice their religion, and under this limited freedom, the temple was rebuilt, and worship was successfully re-established. The Persian king Artaxerxes had even sent influential figures like Ezra to diligently teach the law and Nehemiah to courageously repair the walls of Jerusalem. Without a king of their own, a central figure as in the days of David, the Jews began to look to the high priests for leadership. These priests now played a crucial double role, guiding the people spiritually while also acting as administrators under Persian rule. Many of them became more political than prophetic, more focused on maintaining order and pleasing their foreign overlords than on passionately calling people back to God. This significant shift laid the groundwork for a new kind of leadership, one that increasingly mixed religion and politics, and which would eventually lead to deeper divisions within Jewish society. The temple continued to be the undisputed center of worship and sacrifice, but everyday life required more immediate guidance. People needed daily instruction and teaching that was accessible in their local communities. This growing need gave rise to the synagogue. Synagogues became vital gathering places where people could assemble locally to read scripture, pray, and discuss the laws of God. In these gatherings, teachers and rabbis became increasingly important spiritual voices, providing guidance where prophets once stood. Over time, the focus of worship began to subtly shift from grand sacrifices at the temple to the diligent study and practical living according to the law. Even though there were no new revelations from God during this time, the scriptures that already existed remained absolutely central to the life of the people. They clung fiercely to the Torah, they sang the Psalms with fervent devotion, and they remembered the powerful messages of the prophets. A deep hunger for God's voice grew within them, a yearning for his direct presence. Some hoped fervently for the day when another prophet would come. Others looked to political solutions, hoping for complete freedom from foreign rule. As the Persian Empire continued to shape the land, Jewish communities began to spread out even more. Many Jews stayed behind in Babylon or settled in different parts of the vast empire. These scattered groups became known as the Jewish diaspora. Even though they were far from Jerusalem, they remained powerfully connected through their shared faith, sacred traditions, and unwavering devotion to God's law. Their widespread presence in many cities across the empire would later become a critical part of God's larger plan to spread the good news of the Messiah when the time was right. During these long, silent years, even without prophetic voices, faithful men and women still believed. They held firm to the conviction that God had not forgotten them. They remembered how he had miraculously rescued their ancestors from Egypt, how he had faithfully led them through the wilderness, and how he had given them a glorious kingdom under David. They believed implicitly in his promises, and they waited with quiet anticipation for the one who would come to fulfill them all. The silence, therefore, was not without meaning. It was a season of waiting, a time of profound hope held deep within quiet hearts. The Hellenistic era, Alexander and the rise of Greek culture, c. 331 to 167 BC. As the mighty Persian Empire slowly faded into history, a new power dramatically rose in the West, a force that would not only transform politics, but also fundamentally reshape culture, faith, and identity across the entire ancient world. This new force burst onto the scene through a young, incredibly ambitious military leader named Alexander of Macedon, forever remembered by the world as Alexander the Great. In just a little over a decade, he moved with breathtaking speed and strategic brilliance, conquering territory from Greece to Egypt and pushing deep into Asia. The once dominant Persian Empire crumbled before him, and in its place, a new era, the Hellenistic Age, began. But Alexander was not just another conqueror seeking raw power. He carried a grand vision, one where the Greek language, Greek philosophy, and Greek ways of life would become the shared culture of the entire world. This sweeping movement came to be known as Hellenization. Unlike empires before him that ruled primarily by the sword, Alexander desired something far more lasting. He genuinely believed that if people could think alike, speak the same language, and share similar ideas and values, then true unity and lasting peace would surely follow. In the lands he conquered, Greek cities were meticulously built, schools were opened to spread Greek thought, grand statues were erected, and marketplaces bustled with ideas and goods from every direction. Even when he allowed local rulers to continue in power, their governance and customs were heavily shaped by Greek influence. When Alexander came to the land of Judea, he famously did not destroy it. Historical accounts suggest he treated the Jewish people with a surprising degree of respect and allowed them to largely keep their faith. There's a well-known story that when Alexander approached Jerusalem, the high priest came out to meet him and showed him prophecies from the book of Daniel that explicitly spoke of a Greek ruler. Whether this exact encounter happened or not, what is clear is that Alexander allowed the Jewish people to continue their religious practices, a stark contrast to some future rulers. But with Alexander's sudden and unexpected death, things began to shift dramatically. Alexander died young, at only 32 years old, leaving behind an empire that stretched wider than any the world had seen. Critically, he had no clear successor. His top generals, known as the Diadochi, immediately began to fight fiercely for control. The vast empire was violently carved into separate regions, each ruled by a different family. Two of these kingdoms quickly rose in strength and would directly impact Judea: the Ptolemaic Empire, centered in Egypt, and the Seleucid Empire, based in Syria and Mesopotamia. And right between these two powerful, often warring, forces lay the small, strategically important land of Judea. Ptolemaic rule, a delicate balance, c. 320 to 198 BC. At first, Judea came under the control of the Ptolemies. These rulers were Greek in culture, but their capital was established in Alexandria, Egypt. Around the year 320 BC, Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander's most trusted generals, took control of Egypt and claimed Judea as part of his territory. For more than 100 years, the Jewish people lived under Ptolemaic rule. There were periods of tension and occasional conflict with the rival Seleucids, but overall, Judea remained under relatively stable leadership during this period. The Ptolemies were mainly practical in their rule. They primarily wanted taxes paid and civil order maintained. As long as the Jewish people stayed peaceful and loyal, they were generally allowed to worship freely and keep their customs. The high priest in Jerusalem remained a central figure, acting as both a spiritual guide and a key political leader who kept communication open with the Egyptian rulers. This arrangement allowed the Jewish people to continue practicing their faith, even while living under foreign control. One of the most profoundly important developments during this time was the translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. This monumental work, known as the Septuagint, was undertaken in the vibrant city of Alexandria, a city founded by Alexander himself and now a great center of learning and culture. Many Jews who had settled throughout the Greek-speaking world no longer understood Hebrew well, so they desperately needed their sacred texts in the language they used every day. The Septuagint helped preserve the faith for a new generation and made the scriptures accessible to more people than ever before. It also inadvertently allowed the message of the Old Testament to spread far beyond the narrow borders of Judea, laying intellectual groundwork for future evangelism. This period brought both immense opportunity and significant danger. Greek culture offered impressive advancements in thinking, science, art, and architecture, but it also carried values that often conflicted sharply with core Jewish teachings. Hellenistic ideals celebrated human achievement, physical beauty, and personal glory. In stark contrast, the Torah emphasized obedience to God, humility, and living faithfully within the covenant. These fundamental differences began to cause quiet but persistent friction within Jewish society. Some Jewish people began to openly embrace the Greek way of life. They spoke the language fluently, wore Greek clothing, attended Greek schools and philosophical debates, and even took part in athletic events, many of which went directly against Jewish values of modesty and holiness. These changes caused deep concern and alarm among more traditional Jews. Some believed the two ways of life could coexist peacefully. Others feared that adopting Greek customs would slowly, inevitably erase their unique faith and covenant identity. At the same time, Jewish communities outside of Judea continued to grow rapidly. These communities, scattered across the Mediterranean world, became increasingly important parts of the diaspora. In these places, synagogues became central, not just for prayer, but for teaching, community leadership, and the meticulous preservation of tradition. Rabbis and scribes played vital roles, helping to maintain Jewish laws and customs, even far from the spiritual heartland of Jerusalem. This wide network of faithful Jewish communities would later play an incredibly important role in sharing the message of the Messiah when the time finally came. Life under Ptolemaic rule had its distinct challenges, but it was also marked by a delicate and often uneasy peace. The rulers were more interested in reliable trade and consistent taxes than in enforcing aggressive cultural change. They generally allowed the Jewish faith to continue, and the people found a way to hold on to their identity while living under foreign control. It was not a perfect peace, but it was a manageable one, a fragile balance between the powerful pull of a changing world and the immovable anchor of their ancient faith. Still, this peace would not last. The Seleucid Empire was growing stronger, and soon their ambitions would reach aggressively into Judea. What began as a subtle cultural tension would soon erupt into open, brutal conflict. The next chapters in this long season of waiting would test the courage, faith, and endurance of the Jewish people in ways they hadn't faced since their days of captivity in Babylon. But for now, under Ptolemaic rule, the people of Israel lived in the quiet, charged space between history and hope. They clung to their traditions, they navigated the pressures of Greek influence, and they waited, still longing for the day when God's voice would break the silence once again.